use that on your second monitor instead of a web browser with your chat and stuff like that. So that's what I recommend you to use there. NVIDIA. I can use these settings as well. Full screen and GPU instead of monitor. So we'll use this and same there. Yeah, that's all. No, because I already use it. Okay, that's pretty much it. Okay, hope you enjoyed. Like the video and subscribe please. That should help me out and you if the settings worked for you. Good. So thank you guys. See you next time. If
I get a lot of messages from people asking how powerful their PC needs to be in order to game and stream on the same system. And news, by the way, you don't need it to be that powerful at all. It can actually be pretty modest, and you can game and stream without dropping a single frame on your stream. And I'm gonna show you exactly how to do that. I'm gonna show you 4 things that if you do this, and like literally one of them is like clicking one button, changes the world. I know that sounds too good to be true. Look, I'll show you. I'll show you. I'm running a modest build right now. I'm running a GTX 1660 and a Ryzen 5, and I will game Apex Legends, which is known for making streamers drop frames in OBS. I will game in 1440p and not drop a single frame in OBS. If you're trying to game and stream on the same PC, you need to follow these steps. These are very important. If you're not doing this, you're doing something wrong. So let's get started. Not even gonna roll the intro, not gonna put an ad on this video because the last video I did was 26 minutes long. And I don't apologize for it because it was a good video, but to make your life a little bit easier, I'm gonna make this one 5 minutes long. So I'm hoping at least, let's try. I'm already talking too long, let's jump into it. Step 1, you need to know the difference between X264 and NVENC. Let me just give you some real quick basics on how those work and how those load your PC. Okay, ready? Let's go. It's basically asking the question of which processing unit do you want to encode your stream, your CPU with X264 or your GPU with NVENC. It's important that you understand how they both work so you know how to choose one, and the bottom line is, and I'm going to show you this, if you are streaming on a single PC setup, you should be using NVENC. So if you want to be gaming and streaming on the same PC, you should be getting an NVIDIA graphics card, specifically one with the Turing encoders. I'll get into that in a little bit. So just so you understand how this works, your PC has 2 different processors in it. The central processor, the CPU, the graphics processor, or the GPU. You guys are probably familiar with that. Gaming is going to put a load on both. Heavier load on the GPU, but basically it uses both processors. Then when you launch OBS, it also adds an extra load to both of them in order to render stuff, in order to process alerts, overlays, transitions, all the things that are going on, your camera, that's all rendering, it's using both processors. Then on top of that, if you're using X264, the last process of encoding brings another load on top of your CPU. So after those 2 things, the gaming and the rendering, whatever's left over on your CPU is being thrown into the encoder, and hopefully you've got enough headroom. If you do, you're fine, but you've got to have a pretty nice CPU to do all that. Let me actually just prove that to you real quick. Like looking at this screen right here, I just want to show you how much processing power is going towards either. So I'm not running any games. So you can see right now I've got all my graphs up here. I'm going to show you the important ones. This is the CPU usage and the GPU usage, okay? And right now we're sitting at like 4 or 5%, sometimes getting down to 0 in CPU. I'm not running anything. Let's just load up OBS. You can see right off the bat, GPU goes up to 28%, CPU is going up to 9%. And if we had things like alerts going on or drop some stinger transitions, that's gonna jump even higher. In fact, let's do it. Stinger transition jumped up to 14%, bring the stinger transition back in again. Again, jumped up to 12%, GPU's up at 32%. And by the way, this isn't even streaming right now. This is just running OBS, compiling all the different sources, which I've got a pretty simple stream going on right here. You can see that we go from literally nothing to about 30% on average on GPU, and we went from nothing to about 13% in CPU. Now, on top of that, if we were to start streaming using X264, using the encoder preset of medium for top-notch quality and a bitrate of 6000. Watch what happens when I start encoding on top of that. Look at the CPU. It immediately jumped from 9% up to 32%. Hovering between, we'll say 30, we'll just say 30 on average, 30%. So that means you're adding 21% to your CPU load just to encode. This is why if you're running any PC games that are CPU intensive, or maybe you just have some high settings turned on, you got a lot of frames going, if you don't have that 21% of headroom on your CPU, you're gonna drop frames when you stream. Now, a lot of people say if you're running NVENC, it's gonna do the exact same thing, except instead of putting the load on the CPU, it's putting the load on the GPU. And that's not true. Because while again, the game adds a load to the GPU and the CPU, and then the rendering still adds a load to the GPU and the CPU, the encoding is not done on the regular GPU. The encoding is done on a completely separate chip on your GPU called the NVENC, or the NVIDIA encoder. And it's completely separate, and I'll show you. Watch this. If we change our encoder settings back to NVIDIA NVENC new, you please use new. We're gonna set it to max quality, set it to 6,000 kilobits. You can even just see right here, this is when we are encoding and this is when we're not encoding. Now watch the GPU. Ready? Because this is what we're encoding with our GPU, right? I'm gonna hit start. Look at that. Zero change to our GPU. Maybe if we wanted to get nitpicky, it went up like 3%. This is why if you're using a single PC setup, I recommend using NVENC, because if you're using X264, you're utilizing resources that could be put towards your game for your encoding, and basically those two things are gonna be fighting against each other. Whereas if you're using NVENC, it's just a dedicated chip for encoding, nothing else is being done. Cool. Let's move on. All right, this next one is a big one for those of you who don't understand how much of a load you're putting on your PC with extra little graphic elements. A lot of you guys like to add as many animations as you can. I'm just gonna show you how much of a load animations put on your stream. Again, let's take a look here. We got our CPU usage at 11%. We got our GPU usage hovering about maybe 27 on average. Watch what happens when I take off the animated overlay and that animated background. Our CPU usage goes from 8 to 9% down to about 4 or 5%. Our GPU usage goes from averaging about 35 down to about maybe 31, 32, sometimes even getting down into like the low mid 20s. Animated overlays, especially if you got alerts going on, transitions, if you got a lot of animations, it's gonna add a lot of load to your CPU and GPU. And with the move towards extremely clean designs being kind of the thing, don't be afraid to go with a static design. And if you're on a budget system and you're scrambling for whatever resources you can, I would say go all static and save your animations for things like alerts and transitions where the movement actually matters. It's crazy how much processing power you can save just by going static. Next one, preview window. If you're on a single PC and you're dropping frames, disable your preview window. Both getting rid of unnecessary animations, getting rid of your preview window, save you a ton of resources. If you can close that, if you don't care about looking at it, I would recommend you do it. All right, the last one, tip number 4, and I'm just even gonna start off showing you what you need to do. I'm not gonna explain why yet. When you launch OBS Studio, right click on it and run as administrator. And that is entirely it. I'm dead serious. And I'm sure you're thinking, that can't make a huge difference. Paha. I promise you it does. And let me explain exactly what this is doing, because in the most recent, or like one of the most recent updates to OBS, both OBS and NVIDIA have been working very hard together to fix an issue with Windows's resource prioritization. Let me explain what that means. Typically when you're running OBS and gaming at the same time, Windows will prioritize your game overall, which they get it. It's a gaming platform. If you're gaming, that should be the top priority. Why should it be allocating resources for, I don't know, Chrome? If you're gaming, it's gonna wanna put the resources to the game. So that's what they've done. The order of prioritization are
they have their little Chromebook.